So just want to put a disclaimer out there. Whatever we discuss over the next, whatever minutes this video is, it is primarily based on the research that we've done on published data that's publicly available, um, peppered with a few of our opinions based on our experiences, our education. By no way, mean, shape, or form are we experts. So don't take our word for everything. Whatever we're saying is backed up by research. So do your homework if you have to. Read up some more, learn some more. If you have any more questions, let us know. We're more than happy to take this forward. But for now, hope you learned something and hope you enjoy the video.
And if you like it, share it.
All right, so today we are going to be talking about the COVID vaccine. Since that is a very hot topic, we're just starting to see the first doses being administered. So thought we'd do a quick round of Q&A. We have two very accomplished doctors here on the line. Quick introduction about myself. I am also a medical doctor and currently working in Boston.
Hi everyone, I'm Narmeen Masood. I am a doctor. I don't know about an accomplished one though, but it's nice to be here.
Hi everyone, my name is Saroj. Yeah, I'm more accomplished than Walid though, so I'll that. Yeah, I'm working in Rochester, Minnesota right now. So cool.
Nice. So quick round of introductions out of the way. The first question that I guess we'll need to cover is about vaccines just in general, how they work. So if whoever wants to go first, they can kind of get started, and then we'll do a round robin.
Normally, what happens is when you're exposed to a disease, whether it's a bacteria, a virus, a parasite, whatever it is, it has some identifying antigens on its surface. It's kind of like identification of that particular bacteria or whatever infectious disease it is. Classic vaccines that have been given all around the world, like measles vaccines or mumps, rubella, all of these, what they do is they have some antigen from these specific viruses, like mumps virus or measles virus. And what these vaccines do, when you inject them into the body, the immune system is able to identify them and mount up an immune response. It should be good enough to mount an immune response, but not to cause the disease itself. So that's the idea of the vaccine, that it provides sort of like an active immunity without causing the disease.
Yeah, so in layman terms, essentially what that means is you are letting your body know that this product does not belong in my body, right? So once you give the person a vaccine, now your body is aware that this is foreign contaminant and we need to have an attack response prepared in case it invades our body again. And so it's like setting up checkposts around the body to make sure that if we encounter this foreign contaminant again, we're ready to produce an attack against it. Essentially, that's what a vaccine does.
An interesting analogy that I just thought of is actually the vaccine could be thought of as a no-fly list.
How so?
And so essentially, when a no-fly list is administered, your security personnel all across the country are warned that these people are not allowed to come in. And so what the vaccine does is it tells all of your defender cells or white cells that there are certain bad guys out there. And in this case, it would be COVID. And then whenever they do come in, as Narmeen mentioned, it's going to mount a response. So it, in a weird analogy, I think it's pretty interesting to compare that to something like a blacklist. Okay, so the next question that we have is interesting, and I know Saroj kind of talked about this just a little bit, but there obviously are different kinds of vaccines. No two vaccines are made exactly the same. So just a quick overview on what different kind of vaccines exist.
So there are multiple types. So there are like toxoid vaccines, inactivated vaccines, live vaccines. So they mostly differ in terms of the material that is being used in the vaccine.
I guess at this point we should also mention that the regimens for each vaccine also differ. So, like, we all have had childhood vaccinations, right? And when we think about those vaccinations, you only got that in your childhood, and you do not need to get it for the rest of your life. And that means that the vaccines that you got in your childhood provide immunity to those diseases for your entire life. However, there are some vaccines that you need to take repeatedly to have immunity to that disease. So you might have to take boosters, or like the flu vaccine, you have to take it every year because different strains are around. So that is also something that we should keep in mind.
That's a good point. So it's essentially dealing with every disease in a different way, because some will have some features, whereas others will have other features. And to vaccinate against them, I guess you would need, to target their specific features. So I know, Sarosh, you mentioned and just slightly touched base on the mRNA vaccine. And I know it's very new actually. From what I know, I think this is the big scale, first big scale mRNA vaccination attempt. Is that true, or were you able to find something in research that says otherwise?
Had been news about mRNA vaccines being developed before, but this is actually, I would agree, this is the first time that mRNA vaccines have been produced on a large scale for a sort of like a global vaccination program.
That's kind of cool. So, with the new pandemic, we're at the cutting edge of vaccinations just in general. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the mRNA vaccine. What's that about? What does that do?
The thing is, it's a slightly complicated biochemistry process, but I'll try to explain it as easily as possible. So
Try to.
All of our genetic code, all the information to actually make a cell and make a human body is basically within something called DNA, right? So that's a very commonly used term. DNA is basically just, you can think of it as like a computer code which holds all the information on how to run a human system. Now, let's say, for example, you need to make protein A, right? And within the DNA, there's this very specific region which has the coding for how to make protein A. So the body, what it does is it opens up the DNA at that very specific point and makes a copy of it, something called an RNA. Now, RNAs are of different types depending on where they are within the cell. But the main one which is used to make that protein A eventually, in this example, is known as a messenger RNA. And it's called a messenger because it goes from the DNA to the factory within the cell where the protein would be made. And the trials that have been done by like by Pfizer, which has been published, they have been able to show that after 2 doses, the efficacy of that vaccine has been somewhere close to 95%. And they followed up somewhere close to 37 to 39,000 patients for almost 2 to 3 months. Just to add, because we were asking questions whether this has been done before, this sort of technique has been used for other treatments. So this is something that has been used for treatment of cancers, for example.
Yes.
Therapies in cancer where you're injecting materials like this within the cell, within cancer cells, to help immune cells identify those cancer cells better and destroy them, specifically those cells and not the normal human cells. So they've used, so the technique of this sort of a thing has been present, but it was used for different things, and they've now used that to make this vaccine, basically. To understand which population it would not work in, there needs to be a long-term study, even though Pfizer's trial was pretty good in terms of including a lot of people who had a lot of different things. The only people that they excluded were those who were immunocompromised or immunodeficient, right? Because these are people who have disorders where the immune system is not working itself, so they can't mount a response as it is. But they included people who had other disorders. They had elderly people within them. They had
a lot of comorbids, yeah.
Comorbids, and yet they were able to show that the efficacy overall is pretty good.
And I think adding on to what Sarosh said about the 2 doses that, at least for the Pfizer vaccine, they have to do, which is 2 doses 3 weeks apart. The reason behind that also is to have a mounting or an escalating immune response to the disease, which means the first time you introduce the mRNA and the body produced a response to that protein, it had a smaller response, but it identified, okay, this is a foreign contaminant, I need to have a response. So it built up some backup response. So after the second dose, you have a better immune response to the vaccine, which means, God forbid, if you were to get the disease down the road, you would have a good, well-mounted immune response to that disease. That's why you have 2 doses.
Yeah.
And that also means that if there were any people who suffered any kind of side effects, they had worse side effects after the second dose versus the first dose.
Yeah, and I think a good analogy for this would be, if after the first dose you got, say, like, 35% of your body um, activated in terms of understanding what the foreign contaminant is or COVID is. After the second booster, each of those 35% cells then gets, their buddies, their friends, brings an entire party over. So that goes up to like, 90-95%. It's an exponentially greater response, and it really matters the second dose.
On the second try, the immune cells goes like, oh, my banda bula raha hu.
Vulnerable. Exactly. That's what it feels like, doesn't it?
Have your boys ready.
On speed dial. And I know we kind of talked about this. We talked about the different kinds of vaccines. So I know you mentioned Pfizer. There's Moderna.
There's CanSci, there's Sputnik. So there's one from China, the collaboration between Canada and China, which is being, including at our med school, it's being tested at the Aachen University in Karachi, Pakistan. It's being testing in UAE. It's being testing around. Then Russia came up with their own, which is Sputnik. And then there's AstraZeneca in collaboration with the University of Oxford in UK. The initial ones that were there, so if you look at the news, if you've been following the news, the initial ones were Moderna and AstraZeneca, if I'm pronouncing it right. And they were going pretty good. But then suddenly Pfizer came in and took the whole market by a storm. And then suddenly within a month, we are seeing that they published their results, they got approval, they got FDA emergency authorization, and they started delivering it. And we've already been a week into for healthcare workers, first line workers getting vaccinated for the first dose at least. So a lot of development on that. That's true.
Yeah, like Sarosh said, Pfizer and Moderna both have emergency use approval at this point. However, none of the vaccines are properly FDA approved.
Yeah.
And that's because not enough time has passed. So they have gone through enough checks and balances for it to be approved to fight a pandemic and be used for emergency use, but they still continue to be studied for further approval. Yeah, and that does not mean that they did not test it enough and just approved it just because of an emergency. No, the trial still went through different phases of the clinical trial. They still figured out what dose to give to the people, what kind of side effects come out of it on day 1, 2, 3, up to however many days after the vaccine is given. They still tested for those side effects. They compared it to a control group who received placebo. So all of those basic checks and balances were accomplished by these vaccines to get emergency approval. That is something we should keep in mind.
Yeah, agreed.
That's interesting. And I know that's, FDA clearance is obviously just relevant to the US. And I know a lot of the countries, especially in Pakistan, they're still in, late clinical trials where they're testing out the Chinese vaccine. And then I know there's also trials being done all around the world. So, and a lot of them are going to authorize emergency use, just like FDA has in the US. But like they mentioned, it's probably not going to get full clearance just because we don't know what it can do. We know it will work in the short term, and right now that's the best we want, and we're happy with it. But for the long term, it really does need a bit of work. And I guess this kind of goes into my my next question, which is about the efficacy. The only reason why I would see that emergency authorization is being approved is if you can, without a shadow of doubt, prove that it's effective. in this section, I kind of want to cement that and talk about how effective it is, and if it will even work, and what are the odds that for someone who did get the COVID vaccine, what does that look like? Is he completely immune? Is there a lower risk? What does that what does that person have to deal with?
To answer some of those questions, is that person completely immune? Again, we don't know if they're going to be immune 5 years or 10 years down the line because that much time has not passed. So they will continue to test and see if that immunity level stays for that long. And the other thing really to keep in mind is that this is a virus, and viral infections can go through a concept known as the drift or the shift, which means that the strain of that virus can change over time. So we are yet to see if that can happen to COVID, and in that case, would we need additional vaccines being produced to cover those strains? And I think only time will show. But for the time being, like Sarosh mentioned, with a 95% efficacy, at least for the time that it was tested, I think those are pretty impressive numbers. And particularly to be able to, control the pandemic, control the numbers, and try to flatten the curve even more, it's essential, in my opinion. That's just my 2 cents, though.
And to be fair, it really hasn't been that long. And if we just look at the clinical trials that have been run, getting thousands of patients just in this short period of time, like, can you imagine the pandemic started, like it officially started just 9 to 10 months ago? And so for companies to come up with a solution and then get it into thousands of people and then follow them for a few months is incredible. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of I guess there's cause for celebration and appreciation of that process.
Two things there actually. Like, you have to do a cost benefit analysis of this. Like, yes, we don't have long-term data, we don't know the long-term effects of the vaccine, but then again, this isn't a disease which is confined to like one region of the world or
Yeah.
population. It's a global pandemic, right? So when you're talking about the worldwide population being affected by it, then the benefit outweighs the costs or the disadvantages of it. And the second thing is like what you said, Walid, but what you thought was fabulous. A lot of people actually take it as a myth and then take it as a red flag for themselves that it's been too quick to develop this vaccine. And how did they quickly develop the vaccine? I think we should talk about that as well. That
Yeah.
Why were we able to do it that quick? So the first thing is, this time around, we had a lot of technological advances that firstly sped up the process. The second thing is, what a lot of experts have been telling is that the coronavirus belongs to a larger family of viruses called and has a genetic material similar to the SARS virus, which was there before, right? So we already have a lot of information about the SARS virus. We had the genetic components and everything written down, and we knew what it was. So corona, because it was very similar, we didn't have to do a lot of digging in, getting that information about its genetic code, because we had most of it from the previous viruses. So because of that, we were able to further speed up the process of developing the vaccine.
Personally, I trust the process. Reading all the data that they have published on some of these vaccines so far, I'm convinced because I know, like I said, I trust the process. I know they've gone through the number of checks and balances to reach this point. Now, my question to the two of you is, would you personally take this vaccine if given the chance?
I would. I probably wouldn't think twice.
Well, we survived Karachi's food, so we can survive this,
Would you not take the vaccine, Saroj?
I definitely will. The results have been good so far. The side effect profile is nothing very severe. The side effect profile that has been pointed out by the Pfizer trial is what we get with a couple of vaccines from before as well. Like you get fever, you get headaches, you get myalgias, which is a very normal human immune response. So yeah, I would definitely take it for sure.
From a safety perspective, though, I was reading that a couple of people did have um, allergic reactions to the vaccine, and so that would probably be the only red flag, in my opinion.
So they did talk about that if people have allergies to, let's say, PEG, polyethylene glycol, or the materials that are being used within the vaccine, not the mRNA specifically, but all the other liquid stuff and everything that's used to make the vaccine. So they put an advisory which is there with every vaccine. Like,
Hmm.
if, for example, with the flu vaccine, they said that if you have an egg allergy or egg protein allergy, you shouldn't take it. A couple of people reporting having facial nerve paralysis of the face after they had the vaccine. But the thing is, Bell's palsy usually resolves on its own. So within 3 to 5 weeks, it will just go back.
Yes.
Interesting.
Always tell your doctor if you have any known allergies before you take any vaccinations or even any medications in general. Because of course, if you have an allergy and that product is involved in the vaccine, you can mount an allergic response to it.
Again, the conversation continuously seems to be going in the direction of, this, none of this is new. We've just seen this. Is just new packaging. The content is exactly what we've dealt with before. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the future of the vaccine. And I know Narbeen kind of touched on this with the drift and shift mechanism, but like we mentioned, COVID is essentially a virus at the end of the day, right? And vaccines for viruses are slightly more difficult because viruses tend to change. They'll change, like for example, they'll change their clothes. They'll change the surface proteins. They'll change the composition as well to some extent sometimes. And so that's why you'll see every year you're supposed to get a flu shot. And so, do you guys think this is what we might be seeing for the COVID vaccine, where we might be seeing, yearly or quarterly, or at whatever frequency there might be updates to the virus, just like your phone gets updates. The vaccine might be getting updates, and you might need more regular vaccines. So you might not be done for life. Is what I'm asking.
I think the latest that we've heard a few days ago from UK was that they have identified a new strain. And what they mean when they say it's new strain is that, like Sarosh was mentioning, the surface proteins and the antigens earlier. So this new strain has a different kind of spike protein on its surface, on the surface of the virus. And so with each new strain, you do need to tweak the vaccine to be able to cover that strain. Once you have a baseline vaccine for the initial strain, it's easier to tweak it every time for a new strain and to be able to cover those. And even with the flu vaccine, they cover only the strains that are known to cause the most serious disease.
Mhm.
So I would assume that in the future they would tweak the vaccine to cover the serious strains of COVID, particularly if it is going to change and have new surface proteins every time. That would be my assumption.
That just brings me to my last question, which probably is going to be the simplest of them all. Should you take the vaccine?
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, at this point for me, it's a no-brainer, and I can probably give my 2 cents first. It's such a no-brainer. If you get the chance, please do try and get the vaccine. If not for yourself, get it for your loved ones. For me, it really is a no-brainer. But what do you guys think?
I guess we should give a disclaimer to our audience that we are not experts in the field. We are not immunologists or do not work in the FDA or with any of these vaccines. We are only commenting according to the data that is publicly available and published and out there for everyone to see. And this is our 2 cents. We would personally do it. Of course, you are not mandated by law to do it. So it is your own choice. But from
So
what we have seen so far with, the side effects, even though they exist, not being as severe and the benefit outweighing the risk, we would personally, or I would at least personally take it and suggest people, like what it said, who have the option to take it to be able to curb this pandemic, which otherwise seems to just be going on and on.
Strong messaging right at the end. Can't say anything more. That's where we'll end. Thank you so much for listening if you're still here. If not, we hope that you learned something new. We hope that you're keeping safe, doing the responsible thing, and we wish you the very best of health. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.